We talk a lot about thought partnership in this work. And we've defined thought partnership as the ability of two people to help each other clarify their thinking, find evidence that helps them make decisions and improve on their work, and gain access to new or improved resources, tools, or experiences. So our thought partners in this work have never been sages on the stage, but really are folks, both each other as peers and folks that sit in different positions inside our systems and outside the systems as researchers, as policy experts, etc., that can help clarify our thinking as we clarify theirs, help us gain access to new insight, and help us make sure that we're making evidence-based decisions. So what we have on this panel is an array of our thought partners from this year we're going to spend some time talking about reflections from this past year, mirroring back to you the conversations, experiences, and ahas that they've had in working with you, in doing the work. A couple things that this panel said ahead of time that I just wanted to, as we start, I wanted to frame. Each of you have had one way of putting it, that this isn't an initiative or some outside thing. This work is the work. You've also said in one way or another that this is actually systems work. This is, yes, powerful thinking about making sure that students are accessing content in certain areas and mastering that content, but really it's about systems, you've been saying. And then you've been saying how important it is for us to keep students and student work and student level reflection at the center of this work. So all of you in your different ways have said those three themes, and so we're going to go deeper in this conversation to kind of unpack those themes and have you give us some insights about what else you've seen and learned with us as we've done this work this year. So to start, we just want you to each have your names, your role, both outside of this work and in this community, and anything else you want to share as we start off the conversation. So anything that's top of mind that you want to put in the room as we start the conversation. We'll start here and we'll just go down the line. Your name, your role, and anything else that's top of mind.
Is it working? So this is why the seat was empty, huh? My name is Jeff Zwiers, and I work at Understanding Language Scale. And I am they call me the Director of Professional Development, but I tend to work with districts and schools around academic language and conversations. And that's kind of what I've been doing here as a thought partner.
I'm Phil Darrow. I'm a mathematics educator. And now I'm independent and consulting with Scale and UL and many others. I was involved in the writing of the Common Core as part of the writing team. I spend most of my time now, though, working with teachers and school districts, teaching, I guess you'd say.
Good morning, I'm Laura Schwamm. I'm a senior partner with California Education Partners, formerly sat in most of the seats that you're sitting in my 42-year career in the Garden Grove Unified School District. So as I shared with some of you when we were together up in Lodi, part of my role is to provoke people's thinking without overly provoking them.
And I'm Vicki Armstrong. I'm the Director of Curriculum in Dinuba Unified, and I'm enjoying getting to be part of the CALLI Collaborative in Early Literacy, and I'm also doing work in Math Uncommon. So it's been great to work across districts and with thought partners to improve learning for our students.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sarah Bakari, and I am a project director in academics at TNTP. We've been working with the Academic Language Collaborative as well as Early Literacy, and I'm so excited to see the shift in vision statements. As I walked around the room today, I'm seeing that folks are really focusing in on what is it that kids are actually talking about or writing about, so that's been an exciting movement I've noticed.
David Pearson. I'm a professor of literacy education at UC Berkeley for another 9 days. A week from Thursday, I officially go on the retirement payroll. I just hope that, unlike so many of my friends like Phil, I don't flunk retirement.
Who can beat that introduction? Amazing. I'm Joe Hernandez. I'm the superintendent of Dinuba Unified School District. And in addition to the work with CALLI, we're also working, as Mrs. Armstrong said, with the Math in Common grant.
Great. So the purpose of this panel is really to have the thought partners continue to provoke your thinking without provoking you, but also to reflect back on key insights that they've had in the year about where they're seeing evidence of accelerated improvement in your districts. What are they seeing that's really working, and how do they know? The ground rules for this panel are that you don't have to all answer every question. It's just a chance where I'll ask an open-ended question and maybe 2 or 3 of you can answer. And then after a certain period of time, we'll open it up to audience questions, but all along the way, please continue asking your questions on that bit.ly link, because we will have this panel and others answering those questions on an ongoing way after this meeting. Also, there is a time at the end where each of our thought partners is going to give, to the extent they want, a little bit of recommendations about additional resources or tools or work that they suggest for you to do in the time ahead. So there'll be a little bit of a concluding piece of this conversation that's their suggestions to you. So that's what we're going to do for the next 45 minutes or so. To the panel. We mentioned vision statements, and we started this work with each team articulating an aspiration for what it wants to be true in its district, a vision statement. It's much harder to live that vision. It's maybe relatively easy to put words on a page, but how do you make progress towards living that vision? What is meaningful evidence that you've seen this year? Can you give an example where you've seen teams make real progress to make that vision come true as a system versus just having the vision be words on a page? Anybody can start.
Well, I can start off. I think with any vision, a vision could just be words unless there's action. And so for us, one of the key things is continually message. You can't over-message a vision, because when you stop messaging that vision, then it loses its focus and it loses its impetus, and it can just literally die. So continuing to focus on a vision is so important. Being able to, for example, as superintendents, we visit school sites and to be able to do classroom learning walks with the principal, then you see through the actions in the classroom, through the instruction, through student learning, through the data, whether or not that vision is actually happening.
And does anyone agree or disagree or have an example that they want to use from the work this year?
Yeah, I actually want to direct your attention to page 50 of this handout. And the reason I want to do that is they told us that we couldn't use PowerPoints for our presentation, and I become so dependent upon PowerPoints that I don't know how to do it. So these will not be, a friend of mine's definition of PowerPoint is it's a presentation that is neither powerful nor has a point. So, but these are static images of things that we worked with on our early literacy collaborative. And I, by the way, I forgot to mention in my introduction, I work with Nicole Marino, Annie Quao, and Neil Hasser, and Jody is our wonderful coordinator in this effort. But we've worked a lot on some models to think about how to do a vision. And you see that ladder of success there? That ladder of success puts student performance at the top of the ladder. And what that means is that's the goal we're all trying to get to. And then the question is, what does each of us in our roles have to do on those other rungs in order to make sure that kids can climb to the top of that achievement ladder? And one of the things that we've learned is that the way to make that vision of student performance or achievement possible is you can't go directly after the achievement. We all know what happens when you do that. You end up doing what? Teaching to the test. We want kids to do well on these external exams, not because we spend 140 days a year practicing the test. We want them to do well because we paid attention to what's going on inside classrooms and what teachers do and what students do. The real key rungs on that ladder are rungs 3 and 4, where we ask what teacher practices are operating and what students are doing. And how students spend their time in classrooms is the key to ultimately showing up on the achievement thing. But we get to that achievement because we're enacting wonderful practices inside the classroom. And that leads me to the other model on that page, where you see oral language and literacy. Now this one is too bad it's on a piece of paper because Nicole Marino did this, and that oral language arrow actually spins around, and the reason it does is that we find the other key to success on literacy development, the path to better literacy achievement on the part of kids, reading and writing, runs through oral language. And if you don't have that strong oral language base, and if kids aren't spending a lot of time talking about what they're reading and talking about what they've written or what they're going to write, then you won't get to that literacy achievement. So those are the insights in terms of action that I think that I've taken from interacting with folks on the in the early literacy collaborative. One other point. Collaboration at every level in the system is really important. You got to have stuff going on at the school level so that people can work together and they have a close set of colleagues. And by the way, the school level collaboration is where you can unpack what kids are doing and what teachers are doing inside classrooms and sharing with one another what's going on inside those classrooms. But you also want people across the district, from school to school, sharing with one another. And you also, and to my repertoire today, I added, we got to look across districts too. How wonderful was it today that you look to see how other districts are approaching some of the same problems that you're approaching? And it's really great to have those other perspectives. So those are to be some of the action steps that you take in order to get that vision to make it real.
I'd like to build to that just a bit. We started the day looking at data from our own districts. And I don't know if anybody felt the way I did, but looking at that data was infuriating. We're just not doing good enough by any of our students when we can say that 7 out of 10 are not achieving, or that 2 out of 3 are not walking away with the literacy skills that they need to be successful in life. So that to me lit a little bit of a fire, and it got me thinking about this question around how then do we translate our vision into a reality for our kids? Because none of us wrote a vision that said, I want mediocrity, right? We all have these lofty goals. And I think that one thing that we've seen with working with districts across the nation is that too often visions live within one department. They're in silos, and they need to live with everyone. I'm talking about human capital, our service workers, academic departments, superintendent teams. When we own a vision entirely, that's where we start to see that progress happen. And building off of David's point, it's not just owning it across our departments, but also vertically, so thinking about that classroom, school, and district level as well. And I think that's where we'll start to see that change, is when we think about what does this truly look like to own a vision across an entire system.
Phil, do you have something to add to that?
Just to extend those thoughts and apply them more specifically to mathematics. I think in the evidence from the classroom has to come up into the system and be in front of everybody's daily work. If you work in a school district and you're not looking at evidence coming from your own classroom as part of your daily work, you're disconnected from reality. Because the only reality you're really responsible for is what's going on in the classrooms. And so, but making that connection turns out to be a real difficult design problem, management problem, because the span of control in school districts is very unrealistic. No business is set up like school districts, with so little management capability. There are so many teachers and so many kids and so few who aren't teachers or kids. So that's focusing on how to invest to get more time looking at evidence from the classroom. When I say evidence of the classroom, I do not mean test scores. Test scores aren't much evidence at all. It's easy to imagine when you're talking about writing, looking at samples of student work. And now I want to apply that to math. Those of you who have been in my workshops know that one of the stunning things you learn when you study the way the Japanese teach mathematics so wonderfully in elementary schools there is that they teach math like we teach writing. And in fact, they learned how to teach math from studying the way we teach writing in the 70s and 80s, the Bay Area Writing Project. So the assignments they give to students are more often than not writing assignments, where the work comes after the answer, whereas our work ends with the answer. They're explaining why it makes sense. They're explaining their way of thinking. It's not a setup where the teacher gets up in the front of the room and says, "You're going to learn how to write memoirs today. Here's my memoir. Now I want you to write my memoir. Don't write your memoir, you'll just get confused. So this is the only memoir that makes sense to me, so write mine." That's the way we've been teaching math. And we have to teach it more like writing, and that work the students produce has to come up into the system. So teachers need to get together with teachers and look at work from each other's classrooms. We need to be visiting each other's classrooms, not looking at the teacher, but looking at the kids talking to each other. Come to my classroom, tell me what my kids are saying when they're talking to each other. Helping each other see the students' thinking and production.
Vicki, did you have something to add to this question?
I was just thinking about the fact that part of our work that we do here is we think, how do we support each level of our system in their roles to be able to support that vision happening in the classroom? So part of our work is thinking about how do we get the coaches to have the capacity to work with our teachers to move those shifts forward? How do we support our leaders with the knowledge they need and simple enough systems so that they are getting the data up from the classroom and understanding what they're seeing, and also understanding the degree of difficulty that we're asking of people. They need to be connected enough that they understand what we are asking our teachers to do. So part of the systems work is you're thinking, okay, this is our vision, but how is each different role within our system going to help reach that?
I just wanted to add one little footnote on what Phil had to say. I agree. Having people look at student work is the core of the activity that we should all be engaged in. And that's when I said looking at student practices and teacher practices inside classrooms, that's what I was trying to refer to as looking at that work. But I do want to point out that it's also important not just to look at written artifacts, as you can in writing or perhaps in mathematics, but it's also important to look at oral language. And that's why understanding language has been so insistent on helping us collect samples of oral language that we can then examine and reflect on, because oral language is part of that work too. It's just a little more elusive to look at it, but we gotta find ways to make it stand still so we can look at it and reflect on it.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yes, last thing on the vision piece, and that is that you want it to become a part of the fabric of your school and the fabric of your district, part of the culture. And so it's important that it becomes part of the culture, that is the way we do business, that is the way we run school. And if it becomes part of your culture, then that affects your hiring, and then you know that when you hire someone, and that is one of the most important things that we do, that the core values of that teacher coming in, they have to understand where they're coming to work, and that has to be a good match. So, because that's going to be a part of an ongoing system, because we're constantly going through changes in leadership, changes in teachers, and so we have to have a system that continually sets order to continuing that system that we have in place.
So we've been doing work in these 3 areas this year. One, building mindsets and culture together, a set of shared norms and values about improvement. We've been doing work about cycles of improvement, setting that vision, and then doing some reflective work, setting an objective for the year of where we want to go, how we think we'll know if we get there, what work will we look to, and then setting some actions that we think are going to be the key ones that will get us there. So each team in this room said, okay, if that's our vision, this year, in terms of a high priority student level change, our objective is to go from here to here in our classrooms. Here's what we want to change in our classrooms, and here's why that's powerful toward our vision. Then you said, here's the evidence we're going to look to know. And then you said, here's the actions we want to take in terms of changing a practice in our classroom as it relates to our vision. Then you said, here's how we want to build the capacity of our teachers and leaders, kind of like David's ladder here. You went through these questions. How are we going to build the capacity of our teachers and leaders to make that shift? What actions are we going to take and how do we know? And then, to Joe's point, what's our messaging system? What's our goal for messaging and ensuring shared understanding of the purpose of this? Now, for some of you, it was very focused on one topic area. And for others of you, you've started out thinking about across the whole system coherence. So you started thinking about this topic, and some of you have already thought about systems-wide, but some of you are on this topic. Now, here's my question. We did cycles of learning, we did the culture, and then we also have thought partners, expert thought partners, and each other. We are all different experts in our own domains. How do we know where to go? How do we know what good looks like in the instructional core? How do we, when we're thinking about what we're shifting in our classrooms, how do we pick the right goal for that, the right objective that's powerful? How do we make sure our objective isn't just buying a new curriculum and hoping it works out? Or how do we make sure our objective isn't too small of a grain size, that it's not going to be powerfully advancing the standards? And we've heard a lot about oral language, but how do we know what about oral language is important? Or how do we get teachers to even catalyze that conversation? So this is not an easy question. This is the question you all are asking yourselves right now. How do we know what that rigorous, high-quality expectation is that we should all be driving towards for our classroom shifts? And how do we learn from each other to do that? How do we get access thought partnership to do that?
So I'll leave it to our content experts to share around any specific content area, but generally, I would say that as you're thinking about where to start, you need to start someplace big enough to make a difference, but small enough to be successful. Because part of what people need to feel to get confidence is success. So it can't be such a low bar that anyone, and this applies in my mind when I was a teacher to what you ask of students, giving them a low bar and applauding that they jump over it, the kids see right away that was no big deal. Same thing as we challenge ourselves at all levels of the system. It needs to be, and it will be very contextual based on your system, where you start, but a guiding rule for me was always around, it needs to be significant enough, which means it's not going to be easy to make a difference, but we also have to have the ability to actually get it done and to celebrate when we do, to build people's confidence in the system for the next bar that you can set higher. And I'll now leave it to some of our content folks to say what that is in content areas or other folks.
Your question made me think back to an internal learning opportunity that we did at TNTP. We were looking at a video from Ada Walke, who I'm sure most people who are into literacy know about. And she had stressed the idea that there's no quick fix. This is a long game, and we have to be prepared to be in it for that long game. And it made me think a bit about how I think there was a misconception early on in the CALLI collaboratives that if we find the right program, that's going to fix it. And a program is not going to fix it. Right? It's about actually shifting the culture in our districts. One of the services that we do at TNTP is an academic diagnostic, and we've done them in nearly 40 school systems across the nation, getting into tens of thousands of schools. And I know every district is different, but there are a few challenges that we see continue to rise no matter where we are across the entire nation, in rural districts and urban districts, small, large. Those are that when it comes to literacy, I'll let Phil talk about math. When it comes to literacy, we're not actually putting meaningful, complex texts in front of our kids. So they're neither talking about nor writing about things that matter. The tasks that kids are grappling with aren't aligned to the standards or to the texts. They're far too surface level. And then teachers actually need support in unpacking and understanding what the standards actually mean. They're not the same as they used to be, even though the language may feel similar. But those are the three things that we've seen in literally tens of thousands of classrooms across the nation need to be addressed. And those aren't program fixes. Like, those are actual cultural shifts that need to happen.
Jeff, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Would you agree with that or disagree?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I also, what were the four options? What were the four, A, B, or C, or D? What were they again? No, I'm just kidding. I think that question goes through all our minds of what is good, right? What are we striving for, and are we getting toward the good in some way? And I even in just the last three, the three places that I visited in our little exercise there, I saw some great progress toward the good, right? I was really excited and encouraged to see, and they were doing different things. It wasn't like the silver bullet. They were doing what was right for their district and what worked in their district. So I think that's one of the things to think about is what works for our district, the culture of our district, the teachers, the students in our district, and then get down into the nitty-gritty. And it's going to really be up to us because what we've done for many years is just look at the test scores and call that good. And now if we're looking at particularly oral language, which we've mentioned is very difficult to assess or evaluate, and most tests don't really do a good job at that. It's up to us. So we decide what is good oral language, and it's hard to do in a 10-minute walkthrough from, it's going to take more than that, than just someone walking in and seeing 10 minutes of instruction. That might be part of it, but in addition to that, it's going to take a lot of PLCs, and that's one of the common themes I've seen is teachers getting together, looking at either audio, video, or written samples, and really talking through what is good, and then moving toward, and not being content with, this is pretty good, and let's just kind of keep it, but keep on moving. And that's where I think as we discuss in our PLCs, as we discuss in these groups here, is, okay, this is decent evidence of where we want to go. Now let's figure out what's our plan for moving it, next year to be better. Because as we said, it's oral language especially, which is what I tend to focus, is pretty unwieldy, right? You can gather a conversation from two kids in a classroom, and in 2 weeks or a month, bring it into a PLC. Okay, well, there's two kids from a classroom, and that could take up your whole PLC, which could be very helpful, but you've got another 28 kids in the class. So I'm just, presenting the challenges, but also saying I've seen a lot of progress even in this group of figuring out how can we do that, how can we manage this and move forward. So I'm excited.
David, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on this issue of talk, and I would be remiss as a researcher if I didn't mention the fact that there is pretty credible evidence from the research literature on the role of talk in both reading and writing progress. There's pretty strong evidence that talk matters. Some of my favorite work comes from a colleague of mine I was at the University of Illinois for many years, and a guy named Richard Anderson has this project called Collaborative Reasoning, by the way, which has been implemented by some of his students with English learners in first and second grade settings. And what they do is they have kids engage in kind of like a debate, and they take a moral issue that comes out of like a story. Was it right for Henry, to tell George that he wasn't going to be friends with him any longer? And they take a moral or ethical issue like that. The kids debate the pros and cons of it, and then what they do is they have them write about it, And there's strong evidence that kids who go through that kind of interaction and talk about these issues are able to write much stronger essays, or reflections on the issues at hand. And it's because, and Jeff, I learned this from you, it's because in that talk situation, you have some information that I don't have. There's a reason for us to talk to one another. And when you implement talk, there has to be a reasonable motive for it. And one motive can be is that you have some information that I don't, so we need to talk so I can gain that information. There has to be, what's that information gap? That's what you call it. And the other reason for talk is for us to get our ideas out on the table. As long as they're sitting inside your head, you're really good at excusing fuzzy logic. But once it comes out of your mouth, or once it goes on paper, then it's there for more public examination, and it helps us to clarify our thinking. So you need some kind of motive for the talk to happen. But once you got that motive, then it's pretty clear that engaging in that talk and doing more of it yourself rather than let the teacher do your talk for you. I look at a lot of classrooms, even at secondary classrooms, in which teachers are doing all the talking, and it's like kids are outsourcing their reading and their talk to the teachers. Teacher gets a lot better at reading and talking, but the kids don't get better, so they got to be engaged in it. So having that motivation, I think, is an important piece of this idea of having motivated talk.
Yeah,
David, you're 9 days from retirement, and you're still learning important stuff from guys like Jeff. That culture of not just learning, but publicly exhibiting yourself as a learner, and that's one of the missing ingredients in math culture, math teaching culture. If you're posing as an authority that knows it all, you've just dug yourself in a hole you'll never get out of. One of the wonderful things that you see in some of the high-performing countries in the way they teach math is the teacher's role primarily is to exhibit learning. And they act in the front of the room like someone who's doing the learning. They ask stupid questions. They get puzzled. They wonder out loud. They act like learners. They persist. They act like someone engaged in productive struggle. They don't act like someone who already knows. And in fact, they are learning. And the teachers talk to each other about not just the interesting things their kids did and the questions how to make sense of what the kids did. They talk about the math they learned today. And we need our teachers to have more math content knowledge. The amount they need, the only way to attain it is if they learn a little math every week from over the shoulder of their kids and shoulder to shoulder with the other teachers.
So there's a theme here that I just want to raise up, which is this notion that as human beings, we learn through oral language. We are able to improve what we do by the articulation of our thinking out loud and the discussion with each other. And so for those of you who've been with us all year for the past 18 months, that's the design of this structure itself, right? Our individual teams and each other doing this thinking and talking. And we've even joked about having an observation rubric for us to know how we're doing on our oral language. I mean, I guess the question becomes, how do we create, and this is what maybe something we'll tackle with the superintendents over time, how do we create systems that give us enough time for us, for all of our teachers and all of the adults in the system who need to be learning the math content, the literacy content, how do we structure that internally so that there is enough time and clarity for us to do this necessary uptake of the content? So my question to you about that is, can you think of an evidence, a team or a district in the room or that you know of, that is using, that has the how do we know question starting to be understood? So what are those teams looking at, and how are they looking at that evidence in a way that actually is creating a system-wide understanding of the changes they're trying to make? So not just in one classroom or in one school, but across the whole system. Do you have an example of how evidence is being looked at to make meaning of this. Once they know where they want to go, or once they get a general sense of what they're trying to accomplish, what evidence are they looking at? And how are they organizing themselves to look at that evidence?
I've got two examples that I had time to go to, and that was Santa Paula, and they are looking. We talked mostly about student evidence, and they were gathering video of students and even transcribing. That takes a lot of time, but well worth it from what I heard. So, there's that process of really digging in. Video is one thing, transcribing's, another layer. But they mentioned how important that was to get the transcriptions, take these deep looks at student conversations and student language. And then over here...
And what were they doing with it?
What were you doing with it? You're still in that process, I think, of... What's that?
The power of the transcribing is the conversation that happens from that. So once we look at the transcription and the conversation with the teacher or whoever it may be, in our case, was the teacher and the administrator, looking at that and saying, did we meet our mark? And if we didn't meet it, what do we do to shift our instruction to ensure that we're having quality conversations in the classroom? So it's not necessarily the transcription piece, which is important, but it's the conversation that takes place from that transcription and that video that makes the shift into the classroom.
So it inspired the conversations between teachers and between teachers and administrators. So great.
And how did they know the mark?
That's
because what happened was that we know what we want the company to look like. So we learned from Londo is an exemplar to know what we want, what is the outcome that we want to have from that conversation. So we have that in mind using the 5 academic core skills. And then once we review that, then we know, did we meet the mark or did we not? And then we go back. So how do we enrich that conversation to make sure that we are having the students internalize those 5 academics?
Can you all hear over there? No. Okay. So in summary, what Santa Paula did was to have a teacher, in their instance, a teacher and an administrator, both first transcribe a student conversation, then have a conversation about what they heard, and think about, is that student meeting the mark in terms of what their expectations are for academic conversations, for understanding of these 5 practices that they've established? And then they've said, well, what do we need to change to the degree to which they're progressing, what do we know about our instructional approach that we can change to improve? So they also learned from Lawndale that they need an exemplar of what the highest quality conversation looks like, I think, so that they can have a way of calibrating across each other. So there's a lot of it implied in that in terms of getting the clarity of the purpose of it and the buy-in and the culture of wanting to do. There's a lot to unpack there. But the question that I asked around the evidence is, Jeff is saying that they're looking very much at a student conversation and then the fine grain of what it is to even transcribe and think about the thinking behind the student conversation and how they got to that student conversation. What
conversation was getting at, or what we had in mind is what the conversation was, it output, or was it kind of really discussing the complex text that was being introduced and the interaction.
So another key term was mentioned here, this notion of the complex text that the students were responding to. So it was a whole cycle of set of tasks, conversation, and skill building that the teachers are working on together. Now, imagine a whole system, what that looks like when we've reoriented time and attention to teachers and administrators doing this together. That's a long-term process that we're all engaged in figuring out what the right entry point for each of us is. It's different for each of us. So what have you seen as exciting systems insights these teams have had about how to start where you're starting and how to make sure that you're moving in a powerful direction for your students? Can you give some examples of what you've seen or advice you have for what to do next? You started where you started, now what do you think about next? What do you do next to make sure you're building momentum here? or anything else in this conversation you want to touch on? We're going to get to wrap up pretty soon. But what do you want to make sure that every team in this room is thinking about in terms of doing next that you've seen to build from where they are? It looks like David, and then Laura, and then Vicki, and then Sada.
Well, at the risk of putting colleagues on the spot, and I wasn't here, I was in England when all this happened, but I hear reports that we've taken some good first steps toward this, getting teachers engaged in examining practice with our friends in Sanger. And I would defer to Kathy or to Annie or Nicole or Neil to talk about what happened there a couple of weeks ago when you had the teachers come back after they collected data from their classrooms and had some video evidence that they shared with others and reflected on. And I don't know, I think we're just figuring out where that's going, but I think that the sharing and reflection on what it is they've collected and what they've done with their kids is a good first step toward that. And I don't know, Kathy, can I put you on the spot? And is that a no or a yes? Sure. Yeah.
I think, as you said, the key in that was the collaboration that the teachers had, and they were able to talk about what they were seeing. But basically what we did is we had teachers pilot some work around oral language using the COAT tool with Jeff Swears. And they were able to do that. They, first of all, created their lesson with some background on how to present that, which we did go through the COAT tool briefly. And then they went into the classrooms and they recorded the lessons with the students, so they were able to gauge different levels of students. It wasn't all the same. And the true power, I think, so far from what we've seen is what's come out in the conversation amongst teachers. So what we're trying to do is get a baseline and just understand, what we see, what the patterns are, and figure out our next steps. But to this point, it's been extremely beneficial for us.
I think it is that collaborative sharing, both at the outset and then upon reflection of the evidence that was gathered. But it's very evidence-based, and it really is about, it's the work of oral language that, is focused on, in this case, enhancing literacy development.
So, then Laura, and then Sada, and then Vicki, and then Phil. What's your advice?
I was going to respond to this idea of evidence from the room, just generally. And from my perspective, where I was with you in the beginning and then joined you again at the end, and I think it's natural, we see it in schools as well, people start out wanting to share what they know, but when they really make progress, to David's point, is when they admit all the stuff they don't know and start opening up to here's all that we need to learn. Getting or giving the right answer to the wrong question never gets you anywhere. So what I hear now is people asking the right questions and really, again, to the point of becoming learners as a system and talking about that, creating that culture and mindset for our teachers. I remember as long back as it was, as a new teacher, feeling this pressure that I'm a teacher, I'm supposed to know this stuff. I taught 6th grade. I can't tell you how much stuff I didn't know. And in today's environment, I'm even dumber about what I should know. But the freedom that comes from being a learner and learning it, and I think as we lead our systems, exhibiting that in our own leadership styles, regardless of where you're leading from, is really important next step. Being willing to go in, and I shared this experience of, losing control of a 2nd grade classroom as the superintendent. Man, I lost control of all those little wiggly bodies. But it was probably one of the best lessons that could have happened in my system, where people saw that was okay, and I had a lot to learn. It really helped us turn a corner. Still embarrassing for me, but a good thing for our system. So I think opening ourselves up to the fact, not having the answers, but asking the right questions is a great next step.
Something I've seen that's been really exciting across our CALLI teams is that there's an investment and a willingness to build conceptual knowledge of the content even from the level of the superintendent. And sometimes that means refreshing our knowledge, sometimes it means deepening it, but it always means actually doing the work that we put in front of kids. We were in Red Bluff just maybe a month ago now, and I remember Dave from Corning saying after we had actually had everybody write their own writing sample to a prompt that we had developed, and I remember Dave saying that was refreshing, that was actually energizing to do the work, and it's helping me see it in a slightly different way. We were in Selma also a couple weeks ago, and thinking about like how do we as district leaders build our conceptual understanding of what is a complex text? What are the right questions to engage students deeply in building their own knowledge? But it actually took us doing the work for that to happen. And I've seen a shift. I think that there's more of a willingness over the last year of all of our CALLI teams to say, okay, let's roll up our sleeves, let's dig into it. I may not be in the classroom, but I'm going to do that work so that I understand then how to support my teachers as a result. You'd also asked a little bit about evidence, and one of the things that I wanted to touch on is we've shared a tool with our early literacy collaboratives, the Instructional Practice Guide, which is a tool we like, but it's not the only tool that exists. It does, however, systematize a way for us to collect evidence of student engagement and content. And I think that's the key here, is that we need to pick a tool, or we need to pick a process, and we need to stick with it long enough to say what do we know about what kids are doing as a result.
I had a couple of examples that tie into what you're saying, sticking with the tool and then acting on what you learn from that and making your adjustments. We've had that opportunity to do that with Math in Common. We wanted to look at how our classrooms were doing with making the shift where it wasn't just all procedural, like you were talking about, Phil, where it wasn't just stand and model how to do a problem and teachers do it. So part of our tool was measuring how much are we teaching conceptually, how much are we teaching to application, and there were other various questions that we settled on. And over time, what's been really nice is we trained all our observers so that we were all looking and understanding what we were seeing in the same way. So there was consistent observation, but then we were able to take and interpret that information and make decisions. So based on what we're seeing, gosh, we're not seeing very much evidence of S&P 3 yet, as an example. So what are we going to do as a system about that? Or we're seeing a lot more conceptual, but boy, they're really struggling with tasks, getting that higher cognitive demand task going, more problem solving, which as a teacher, I know when I first started teaching True Confessions, the word problems were what I skipped or were extra credit. That's what I did when I started. So we know that that's a point where teachers hit a wall sometimes. So how are we going to help them over that wall? So having a tool that you use consistently over time, frequently with a team of people that are calibrated together, and then make decisions about what you're going to do in the system to support your teachers and supporting your students is critical. And then one last little example of evidence, one thing we were noticing in terms of our CALLI work was within the guided reading groups, because that was an area we were working on, they had the structure of guided reading, but in terms of actually having teaching points and responding to the types of miscues that students were doing, we weren't seeing what we wanted to see. So one thing we thought about was an idea we picked up from our colleagues in Cutler-Rossi was a protocol for our teachers to do some running record analysis within their PLCs. So we piloted that this spring with a couple of grade level teams and adjusted our protocol so that next year part of the work that they'll do together is bring a sample of a student that they're wondering how to help, a struggling student, and they'll bring that to their PLC, a running record, and the team will look together and kind of analyze what kinds of errors is this student having and how can we help? What's the next step in lessons? So that's a form of evidence that we're going to take and use formatively, but with the power of the teacher team doing it. And I think many of you touched on it up here and in the room, that it's the conversations that our teachers have around the topic that move things forward.
Oh, go ahead.
Those are great examples. And again, I'm going to speak specifically about mathematics. When teachers respond to what we're urging them to do. They cite certain problems, which are their reasons. They're telling you in so many words why they're not going to do what we're asking them to do, even though they say, we wish we could. And those problems that they always come with, when I've worked with your teachers, number one, so many of my students aren't ready for grade level work. Their prior knowledge, the gaps, the differences. And when the teachers are saying that, they're talking about something that's real. It's not a teacher's attitude problem. It's a real problem. And we have to listen to them. And they may not say it in a way that they should. And so it may grate on our social justice culture. But they're talking about something that's real. And they don't know how to solve the problem. And if we don't respond to the reality of what they're talking about, then we're not communicating. And it's our job to listen to the teachers. Number two, there's too much to cover. And we're guilty. I'm guilty because I was involved in writing standards. Everyone that has a pacing plan is guilty. Everyone that says cover everything that's going to be on the state test is guilty. The system at the national level, state level, district level, the principal, the message we're giving math teachers is make sure you cover everything in the grade level. Don't waste time on stuff below grade level. Cover the stuff. That is what's wrong with how we teach math in this country. And every research study has told us that's what's wrong. It's called, in the research, it's called the mile-wide, inch-deep problem. In teachers' talk, it's called, I don't have enough time to cover everything. And our response really has to be, well, then don't. Cover really important stuff and take the time it takes for kids to learn it. And this thing about grade level, math isn't like that. When you do a long division problem, just to take a stupid example, you have to start by multiplying, and you subtract. And you have to use second grade place value and third grade place value. You're using about 6 grade levels of stuff to do a 6th grade problem. That's what math is like. Every math problem has about 5 grade levels worth of stuff in it. And you have to deal with all of them. Just the third, and so one of the things we have to do in our systems work is shut off the messages that your job is to cover topics. And in exchange, focus on teaching the kids math. So the third thing with alignment, a lot of the stuff we do in the name of alignment makes it worse. We use alignment mile wide, inch deep. The inch deep part says our curriculum is too superficial. In math, it's thought of as once you learned it, you're finished learning it and you're done. And you can move on to the next thing. There's nothing else to learn. And if you finish fast, there's no place to go except the next thing. So you've got to accelerate. So I'm going to give you tomorrow's problems today. What am I going to do tomorrow? It doesn't work. Other countries don't do that. In other countries, the math has depth, just like history. So we don't, oh, you're done with the Revolutionary War? Quick, start working on the Civil War. You've got to accelerate. No, because it's got depth. There's no end to what you can read about the Revolutionary War, no end to what you can write. Math is like that. Math is like social studies. It's like ELA. We need to teach it more like that. I know the ELA people are thinking, oh, you don't want to do that.
Well, the problem in ELA is we're teaching it like it was math.
Yeah, right. So what do you have to align? What matters is what are the students producing? What are the assignments that they're producing written work for? Not what are the titles of the lessons or what's in the table. The publishers know how to make it pass alignment tests. Tell me what you want it to align to, and I'll just print that as my table of contents. Now, what assignments are the students doing? Because most commercial books will give you enough assignments in every lesson so every teacher can do whatever they've always done, just like you did when you were skipping the word problems. We're still skipping the word problems. That's what those books are. What are the assignments your kids are actually doing? What is the quality of the work that they're producing? And if you look at what they produced, not the prompts, but what they wrote, and all it is a bunch of answers, you're not in alignment. You got to look at what they're producing. And let's extend that to the oral language. In the oral language, are they listening to each other's ideas? Are they talking about each other's ideas? Or are they just taking turns saying, this is how I did it and this is what I got? So we have to think in our systems ways of how we are inadvertently encouraging mile-wide, inch-deep math curriculum and turn it around so we're encouraging slow down, have the kids who are going too fast go deeper, not faster, and listen to each other's ideas. What are the kids producing?
Now, one of the primary things I want to invent in this lifetime is a time stretcher, because this conversation is so essential and so important. And I also want to make sure that we have enough time for the rest of the activities today. So what's going to happen is that each person on this panel is not only going to get a chance right now to provide some closing thoughts about next steps, and David, you can respond. I know I caught you mid-thought. Hold that thought, and I want you to go first. But some thoughts about where we go from here and resources to access. We're going to continue the conversation on that Google slide. There's some great questions up there for each other and for these thought partners. So keep that conversation going. We're going to have each person here also respond with some thought-provoking thinking for you after this session. And we're going to follow up with each of you with conversations and questions that you put up there. So this is not the end of this conversation. This is the beginning of a lot of really important conversations we need to continue. So right now, starting with David, let's just do some final thoughts about what is most essential as we go forward next year.
Well, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, figuring out what role each of us can play so that the end game is improving both what students do inside classrooms, and I want to improve how they do on tests. I'm not going to shy away from that goal, just as long as we don't think the only solution is teaching to the test. The real solution is changing what they do inside classrooms. The second point is that collaboration, repeat that, is important at every level within the system. And we all want to be part of both local and broader communities of practice where we can learn from one another. The third point about oral language, I've said enough about that. I hope you believe that even though I'm a literacy guy, I think it all starts with oral language. And the last thing I want to say, and Phil's comments about math led me to believe it, making a long list of standards deceives us into believing that we have to have everyone have its sort of day in court because they're all independent of one another. I assure you, in reading and writing and oral language, they're not. There's a lot of redundancy. It's all about language. And you know, when you're predicting an outcome, you use exactly the same cognitive process you do when you're finding a cause or an effect. You're talking about one thing that happened, and then another thing that happened, and you're trying to posit a relationship between the two. So we'd be better off if we looked for redundancies and synergies in this curricular space rather than thinking that every little piece of the curriculum had to have its own independent time in day in court, so to speak. So I want to leave you with that thought. Let's look for synergies amongst all those elements that lead us to be overwhelmed at the enormity of what it is we have to do.
We'll go with Joe now.
Right, I agree. I think the issues that we face are just, use the word overwhelming. They're staggering at times to see those statistics that we saw here at the start, and we all face them. We all have those similar issues. We also face generational poverty, and these issues, you have to confront them because we've got to give our kids a chance at a future where they can have college and career and life skills. So collaboration becomes such an important element, just like we talk about where as teachers, when we used to work in silos, we can't work in silos as districts. We have to be able to work together because the issues are not only the same, but the collaboration will help generate ideas, best practices, support, and I think that will really be beneficial for all of us. In fact, I had a conversation with one of our superintendent colleagues here days ago saying, you know, we as superintendents need to come together and meet and set up a network and collaborate more, because as superintendents sometimes we're overwhelmed with the issues of the day, but this is our work and we can't forget that.
I'll start off actually with where we began the day, which was thinking about why are we doing this work. And in that share, I'd actually shared with our friends from Golden Plains that equity is the center of why we do what we do, but we define it in a really specific way. And I've shared this with Selma, I think, and Danuba as well, that within TNTP, when we talk about equity, we say that it's comprised of 3 A's. And I want to be really clear here that those 3 A's are not about making kids just feel good. Like, that's a nice thing that happens as a result, but it's really about the knowledge we're putting in front of kids. So the 3 A's are, first, access. Are we giving all kids, regardless of background, regardless of English language learner status, regardless of special education, access to the same rigorous, complex content? Then the second is acquisition. So we've put it in front of them. What are we doing now to allow them to actually make meaning of it? And then the third is agency. So how are we going to apply that? What is it going to mean for your life? So when we think about that access, acquisition, and agency, it really comes down to the content we're putting in front of kids and the purpose we're putting in front of them for, so that they can go out and be ready for college and career and a life of opportunity. So those are the things that we're starting to think about for next year, but again, it's a long game, and it takes some thoughtful process to actually get to putting all those pieces in place.
And piggybacking on that, it takes perseverance and self-discipline, because as that one graphic, I tried to snap a picture of it, success isn't a straight line. It swirls and we move, but we have to be disciplined to stick with what that end vision is and be really clear with everyone what that vision looks like in practice, what students are doing, what students are saying, what teachers are doing, what teachers are saying, what each of us in our roles are saying. And I would kind of conclude with, when we think about evidence, Fullen talks about that a leading indicator of change is what you actually see in the classrooms and observations, and a lagging indicator is the student achievement scores. So if you chase after changing what you need to see in the classrooms first, then you're going to get to the student achievement scores. And I think that's what David was saying, so I would end with that.
I would just, first off, thank all our colleagues on the panel, but also all of you in the room. At Ed Partners are why, you see it up there all the time, but it's truly what we believe, that the only people that can truly make a difference for the kids and communities are those of you that are right there with them and serving them. And I thank you for reaffirming that in the work that we see here and in the progress we see. I guess the one thing I hope is that you believe in your own ability to do this and in your system's ability, including when it gets hard. If you believe you can do it, you can. You can do anything you choose to do. And we believe in you and are very encouraged by what we see, and happy to be part of helping you achieve those beliefs.
So for someone who's skeptical about test scores, I spend a lot of time working with them on the oversight panel that looks at the validity of NAEP. David used to be for ELA, I'm the math guy. What did the data actually show? The data show in mathematics, not in reading, but in mathematics, from the beginning of NAEP in the 70s, every decade has outperformed the previous decade. Starting in the late 90s, or late 80s, early 90s, NAEP started giving a much more comprehensive math test and a more comprehensive sample, so every state could get a score. You've seen those scores. On that more comprehensive test, every decade has outperformed the previous. And this is true of every group. So African and American and Hispanic students today are performing at the same level that white and Asian students performed in the early 1990s. But there's still a gap. And we're not catching up to Japan, although Canada is. And some of our states are. Massachusetts is. New York is well above Germany, for example, New York State. California, unfortunately, is not one of the better states in this country. But the reason I'm saying that is newspapers and the media shorten the story and make it seem like schools are going downhill. And we've been doing a lousy job in the public schools. That's not what the data show. The data show, amazingly, with all the trouble and turmoil, we've been getting better and better. And students like you that are sitting in your classrooms today know more math than you did, quite a bit more math than you did. And so congratulations on doing a good job, and don't forget you're doing a good job, because we're starting to see a real assault on public education. So I think some of us have to get used to not just using the bad news to motivate change, but be much more aware of the good news to motivate survival.
Jeff, you have the last word.
I've got about 10 minutes of stuff. Is that okay? No, thank you to all the previous colleagues, and I've got 2 pages of notes up here, and I'm trying a lot swirling around in my brain. One of the things that I come back to, though, is there's a lot of vision statements and a lot of talk about communication. And so what I want to do is I want to challenge you, and I'm challenged myself, to think about, are kids communicating? You might hear them talk, but communication means they really want to communicate something, to do something with that talk. Or are they reading something to actually get something that they want to read, or are they just doing it to answer questions and get points? Now, I've harped on this a few times before, but we've been doing a lot of point-getting stuff in the past. And I think it's time for us to think about how can we shift over to activities, lessons, and systems that promote communication that kids actually want to communicate. They want to listen, they want to read, they want to write, they want to talk with a partner. Not just parrot back sentence frames to one another for points and because the teacher's watching, but actually do something with the knowledge and the ideas of their peers, of their friends, their classmates. And also, I want to communicate to you. Like if I'm in a pair and I really want to get it out, something different's happening in my brain than if I'm just parroting back something for points. Things are going to stick. My language is going to develop. My content's going to develop if I'm not just doing it for points, and I'm actually doing it to communicate. So that would be my, one of my, in looking at, there's a lot of talk about communication, and it's easy to observe or do a walkthrough and see talk, see reading, see writing, see the stuff, but it might not be authentic communication. So it'd just be something to think about as we move on. Also, I think, were we supposed to share some resources? In a nutshell, a quick nutshell, I think it's going to show up on the screen. Most of you know we've been providing online PD courses, MOOCs, and we've got a few coming up. We're actually revamping them and improving them. We've got a few coming up. There's a slide coming up on one's on leadership, or a couple are on leadership. One's on math. Actually, Phil and I are working together. I'm excited. And there's some others coming up the pipeline next year. And there's also a set of tools that are both associated with the MOOCs and are separate that you can also access. So I just wanted to make sure you knew about these things. I won't talk to them right now, but you can look at them as we go into lunch. All right?
Great. So that and everything that you just heard referenced exists online on the online CALLI collaboration space. We have recorded this conversation and we'll put up the raw video as well as a synthesized version of this day later this summer, because there's so much thought-provoking information and insight that we just wanted to make sure that you don't have just one pass at it, but you have additional time to think through it. Culture and mindset, building this culture of improvement and belief, optimism. Cycles of improvement, where you're working together to make meaning, look at the powerful class student evidence, and think about your improvement from all levels of the system. And then thought partnership. Those are the 3 things we've been working on this year. And those are the 3 things we'll continue to refine as teams and as collaboration as we go into next year.